Good morning. Good morning. Welcome to our Luncheon with Books for August. We are so happy to have all of you. I know we have some new people today, so you're welcome to come anytime. I want to thank Grace for the beautiful music and also Historic Northside Garden Club for our lunch today. From the back of the room, you may see a couple of sheets come by. Those are our dues. We're still collecting dues. If you've already paid dues for the year, they're $20. If not, and you've already paid, don't worry about it. And let me just say that you do not have to be a member of the Friends group in order to come to Luncheon with Books. We enjoy having you. All right, if you will stand, we will do the pledges. Attention, salute, pledge. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Make it happen. And this is a good day to have a pledge with our program. One thing I didn't mention, but you might notice the paint. Thanks to Sissy and all the work she's done, it looks beautiful in here, and it sure does beat what we had before, so we thank her very much. Our program today, as you can see, is Mississippians in the Great War. And what we're going to talk about today, what it will be about, is letters from different men that were served in the Great War from Mississippi, or they had a connection with Mississippi. Bill Rutledge is going to come first, and he will do a short introduction of that war. And then you will see that the PowerPoint will show the name of the person who is that wrote the letter, and there may be a little paragraph about him, and then the person will be reading the letter. So pay attention to, we'll give you a few seconds to what's going to be on the screen, and then the person will read that letter. We have about 20 letters, but we're not reading the whole thing, they will just read parts of them. I want to give you one quote that was at the very front of the book before Bill comes. One day, people have forgotten any of this happened. This war, these deaths, this demolition, oh, not for some time, but eventually it will fade. Take its place amongst the layers of the past, its savagery and horrors replaced in popular imagination by others still to come. And that is a quote from Kate Morton. And this is certainly true. I don't think this war and even parts of World War II are even taught in our public schools. But I'm going to ask Bill to come now, and then each person will just stand and read their part of the letter.
She's right about a short introduction. I've been given a short period of time to get out a lot of information here, so I'm going to talk pretty quickly about the Mississippians in the Great War and the selected letters from that book. There was nothing like World War I prior to it. The last major war in Europe prior to World War I was in 1815, which was almost exactly 100 years before the start of World War I, which was known as the Great War. And that's why it was called the Great War. Everyone thought at that time that it was the Great War and the war that would end all wars. It ultimately, well, the date of the war started in 1914 in the summer, and it ended on 11 November 1918. There were 23 Allied countries who fought together on the Allied side. They were primarily, the primary entrants in that war were France, Great Britain, Italy, Japan. I think a lot of people didn't know Japan was in World War I. And then in the very end of the war, of the last 18 months of the war, was the United States. The Central Powers, who were the enemy of the Allies, included Germany, Austria-Hungary, and Turkey. The 18 months, that was the period of time that Mississippians were in the war. That was from April 2nd, 1917 until October 31, Halloween, 1918. At the time that the Mississippians entered the war, the Germans occupied almost all of Belgium, and they occupied most of France's coal mine areas and their industrial areas. For 3 years, you've seen movies and pictures of the trench warfare. For 3 years, the Allies on one side and Central Powers on the other lined up against each other in trenches, with the area in the middle called no man's land, which included primarily barbed wire and frequently poisonous gas. That line was moved only 10 miles during the entire World War I, the entire period. So this was nothing like World War II. It was just simply a war of who could kill the most men and attrition who had men standing when it was all over. The big changes in World War I from any of the previous wars in the world were, you wouldn't think about it, but the spade. All the soldiers had spades because they all dug holes, not necessarily foxholes so much as trenches. Then the barbed wire had been used solely for livestock until World War I, and then barbed wire was used as a barrier between the trenches in no man's land. Artillery was upgraded and machine guns were used for the first time. Then Springfield rifles, which were bolt-action rifles, were used for pretty close to the first time that they were actually efficiently used. And then if you remember, that was upgraded in World War II to the M1. Prior to that, they'd been just mostly single-shot weapons of different types. Communications and transportation were significantly upgraded from any prior wars with mechanized vehicles, some early-stage tanks, and the communications were used by wire mostly, whereas prior to that, it had all been verbal communications or by runners. The biggest change was chemical warfare, which involved mostly, I'm going to turn this thing around, mostly chlorine, and chlorine poisoning was very common during World War I and led to some of the changes in the rules of war about the use of chemical weapons. Woodrow Wilson was the president of the United States at this time, and he was very much opposed to entering the war, and he actually issued a proclamation of neutrality in 1914. Then the Lusitania, you'll remember that, was sunk in 1915, and so the United States was ready for war, but still didn't want to enter war. Then, and after that, this was interesting, Britain intercepted a telegram from from Germany to Mexico. And Germany made the offer to Mexico, if Mexico would help Germany and the Central Powers in World War I, they would give Mexico, New Mexico, Arizona, and Texas. Well, when the United States found out about that, that pretty well did the trick for the United States to enter the war, except in 1917, a U-boat sank 4 clearly marked U.S. vessels with a large loss of life, and at that point, the United States entered the war. I'm going to read you one paragraph out of the book that will explain some of this pretty clearly. On May 23rd, and this would have been in 1917, Major General John J. Pershing, head of the American Expeditionary Force, that's the AEF, you'll see in your blue sheet you got there, in France, boarded the ship Baltic in New Harbor to sail for Liverpool. He and the 187 officers, enlisted men, and civilians who accompanied him on board comprised the entirety of the American Expeditionary Force. While they were at sea, a Mississippian, Lieutenant Colonel Fox Connor, began working to plan the artillery needs for what was anticipated to be a force of 500,000 men. Ultimately, Connor served as Pershing's right-hand man in building the AEF. Fox Connor was from Slate Springs in Calhoun County, which is a village. He later became Eisenhower's confidant and most important general, and one of his most important generals in World War II. If you're interested in this type thing, you might want to look up Fox Connor. When we entered the war, World War I, I gotta hurry here, we had only 208,000 plus men in the military. The Selective Service Act was passed on May 18, 1917, and 2 million men were drafted. anyone ages 18 to 45 had to register, and the Army had three branches at that time: the regular Army, National Guard, and what was called the National Army. Everyone was subject to the draft, all races, except they were segregated between the American Indians, blacks, and Caucasians. Those three different considered races were segregated, and all combatants went into World War I with very little training. I'm going to read you one other thing, and I'll sit down here real quickly. Mississippians answered the draft notice calls and registered in large numbers. 344,724 by September 12, 1918, according to the biennial report of the Adjutant General of the State of Mississippi. 173,082 African Americans registered in the state, while 171,424 whites did. Nearly 60,000 Mississippians served in World War I. I think that's about as much as I can tell you from the introduction. It has a lot of statistical information in it that's very interesting, and if you read the book, you definitely want to read the introduction. It gives you a lot of history about World War I, things I didn't know, and I thought I knew some stuff about it.
You want us to just stand right here?
I think that would be great.
F.R. Price, Company C, 8th U.S. Engineers, Fort Bliss, Texas. And this is a letter written to A.F. Herman, editor of the Pontotoc Sentinel, August 5th, 1917. Dear Mr. Herman, please change the address on my Sentinel to Frank R. Price, Company C, 8th U.S. Engineers, Mounted, Camp Stewart, Fort Bliss, Texas. Our battalion name has been changed to the 8th Regiment of the U.S. Engineers Mounted, and mail must be addressed that way to ensure prompt delivery. I haven't got my copy of Sentinel for the last week in July, and I don't want to miss any more. We are still camped near El Paso, but are expected to be moved to some other camp sometime soon. There is no timber here, and as we use round timber for building military bridges, we have no material handy for use in engineering drills. For that reason, we need to be moved to some place where we can get to growing timber. It goes on to say quite a number of us are taking lessons in French now so that we'll be able to talk to the girls when we get to France. There's no telling when that will be, though. We hope it will be sometime soon, for we all tired of the monotony of camp life and want to see some excitement. We have quite a job cut out for us when we get there, though. We are to take charge of the railroads, mines, powerhouses, water plants, and engineering work of every class, and there'll be enough to keep us all busy. Please change the address to the one I have given and keep the Sentinel coming. With best regards, I am yours, F.R. Price. Deputy J. Leopard, Gulf Division Director, American Red Cross in New Orleans, and he's sending this to Dr. J.Q. Fountain, May St. Louis Red Cross Chair. So Red Cross has urgent call from Major Grayson Murphy for an enormous quantity of knitted woolen articles. Here's a cablegram from Major Murphy. He says, last winter broke records for cold and misery among people here. Dread coming winter, find us without supplies to meet situation. Urge on behalf of our soldiers and those of our allies who will suffer from frozen trenches, and also thousands of French and Belgian refugees and repatriates being returned to Switzerland. We ask the Bay St. Louis chapter to furnish a definite number of the requirements. Your allotment is 300 sweaters, 300 mufflers, 300 pairs of wristlets, 300 pairs of socks. Full instructions will follow in 2 days. Ask your members to furnish all knitting work now on hand and clear the deck for the action. We want every chapter to have his chance to do his part in making good on this call for help from France. W.J. Leopard. Okay, this is Chris Cooper. He's 43rd Squadron, Kelly Field, South San Antonio, Texas, to editor of Brandon News. This is August 17, 1917. And it said, Editor News, would you allow me a little space in your paper to tell of the Army Aviation Corps? We are out from town about 6 miles and equipped with cars to and from. We use an immense territory of prairie land for field flying practice. The boys work on machines and are taught to fly them. Mornings, the boys drill from 7:30 to 11:30. Afternoons, they are given passes to visit town if desires. After supper roll is called, and the boys make for the musical instruments to pass away the lonely afternoons and forget for the moment the good home they left. The boys that compose my squadron are half from New Orleans and nearby towns, while the other boys are from the west and east. We have learned to like each other, and we are willing to fight side by side for our country's cause. Best wishes to you and to all our friends. Sincerely, Chris Cooper. This is the same field that Lynn's uncle learned to fly in 1937. He ended up being the first casualty, one of the first casualties in World War II with his B-17.
Watson Tenon, writing to the Natchez Democrat. Dear Democrat, many of my friends in Natchez asked that I let them hear from me when I was located in the county. However, as I am kept rather busy selling stamps, giving out stationery to the boys who want to write home, wrapping Xmas packages that will bring happiness to fathers, mothers, and sweethearts back home, preaching, and 1,001 other things, I don't have time to write many letters. It is Christmas time in Camp Beauregard. The boys all feel it too. They were badly disappointed a few days ago when the government shut down on their furlough, and instead of letting 50% go home, made it 5%, and later cut out the 5%. The people back home can hardly imagine what Christmas at home means to a bunch of fellas who are experiencing their first Xmas away from home. How Christmas around the old family hearthstone takes on a golden halo to the American soldier. But while the fellows are disappointed, still they are brave and courageous. I have been among a great many of them and have still to hear the first one of them whining or complaining. Yesterday was my first religious service in the county. I preached to a fine crowd of Red Cross nurses and doctors at the base hospital. They worship in a YMCA hut adjoining the hospital. I have never addressed a more attentive and appreciative audience. I told them at that hour, 11 a.m., the Christian people all over America were assembling in their several churches and were remembering in their prayers, in a special way, their boys and girls in the Army and the Red Cross. It would have filled your heart to overflowing to have seen how the eyes of the nurses and doctors filled with tears when I mentioned home. Sunday night, I preached to the boys in my hut. We had a fine bunch. Most of our fellows are in the 114th Engineers, made up of Louisiana, Arkansas, and Mississippi boys. And believe me, they are a fine lot of fellows. Any state would be proud of them. Have seen quite a number of Natchez boys. They all look fine and are in good spirit, even though most of them will spend Xmas away from home. Excuse the rambling, disjointed letter, please. I write between the acts of selling stamps and wrapping up Xmas packages for the boys. Goodbye for this time, as ever. Finley W. Tenon, Religious Secretary, Hut Number 4, Camp Beauregard. P.S. Send us some new magazines and novels. Many of our boys are quarantined and they need something to read. This is Victor Sylvester Ashmore writing to the Pontotoc Sentinel. Dear Editor, will you be kind enough as to print a description of the life of a prisoner in the Army? Would it surprise you and my friends back there to know that I am in the guardhouse for 30 days for going home without a furlough? And I want to ask those of you that I told a story about my past to please forgive me for telling such an untruth. It is absolutely impossible for anyone to get a furlough home. Even if some of our people should die, we could not go home as we are under a very strict quarantine, realizing that in a short time we would be leaving for France and that perhaps I would never get to see my people and friends again. I went home anyway, and as a result, I am in prison. Some of you may consider me disgraced for life and will never associate with me again. I don't care who knows that I am in here when I did nothing more than go home to see my people. And if you care to think any the less of me, you have that privilege. Some of you may not know what a guardhouse is. It is a row of tents just like the other boys stay in, except they are guarded at all times to keep any from escaping. As soon as we are put in here, they take our hat cord away from us. We have been digging trenches for the past few days, but nearly every soldier has to dig trenches sometime during their training. There are about 60 boys in here now, and quite a number confined to their company street for 90 days and a $60 fine. They have to help dig trenches too. Most of the boys that are here are nice, well-educated Christian boys that never paid out a fine in their life. They just got homesick and went home without a furlough. We are not permitted to talk to anyone. Of course, we do, but are not supposed to. Also cannot salute any officer of the Star-Spangled Banner when it is played. In other words, we are supposed to be treated as convicts should be treated. Every morning we get up at 5:40, go to breakfast. Each one goes to their own company for their meals, and they always send a guard along with a loaded gun to see that we are sure to come back. At 7 o'clock, we are lined up and marched out to dig trenches with a number of guards along. They are stationed all around the trenches to keep anyone from running away. However, I don't think anyone would escape, even if they had the chance. This is Robert Jeff McWhirter writing to the Pontotoc Sentinel. Dear Sir and Friend, I will write a few lines to the Sentinel, as it is my old paper. We'll proceed at once to tell a little of Army life, though I fear I may not give an interesting recital. We left Pontotoc on July 17th and reached our destination at midnight that night. We marched 3 miles to the detention camp where each of us were given a mess kit, a blanket, a bed sack and cot, towels, and scrub brush. Then we were shown our tents, 8 in each tent. I was placed with 7 other fellows from Pontotoc County. On Sunday, we were called out to attend church, most of us going. Camp Shelby is a nice place. It is on a big hill in dense pine woods. You can see nothing but pine trees and tents as far as your vision reaches. Of course, there are some buildings, such as the infirmary, base hospitals, theaters, YMCA, and mess halls, but all the boys sleep in tents. At 5 o'clock every morning, we were called out and lined up for roll call and physical exercise lasting about 40 minutes. Then we would fall out, and at 6 we would go for breakfast, after which we cleaned our tents and drilled until 11. An hour later, we ate our dinner, and until 3 that afternoon permitted to rest at the YMCA, or the canteen. We then practiced in the drill field until 5. No doubt some of you are wondering what we had to eat. Well, most everything you could think of, such as beef stew, spuds, beans, fishes, fruit. Had it been served like we have it at home, it would have been fine. But was all stirred up in a pan together, and not being accustomed to eating that way, it was rather tough. I like South Mississippi very much, except it is extremely dusty, being a sandy soil and soon dries. After a hard rain of 2 hours, you could kick up dust. There comes a cloud not much larger than your old hat, the wind blows, and the dust so thick you could not see which way you were going. I've been quarantined 12 days, but will be released next Thursday. I am on guard tonight for the first time. Please send the Sentinel to the address given below. I've missed a copy or two, and I regret it greatly, as the paper is like getting a letter from home. Yours truly, Jeff McWhirter, Company K, 149th Infantry, Camp Shelby. This is William Henry Hood, writing our own New Albany Gazette. Dear editor, if you will give me a little space in your valuable paper, I will relate to the readers of the Gazette a few of my experiences since I enlisted in the U.S. Navy. 1 year ago last September, I entered school at Mississippi Normal College, at which institution I would have finished the teacher's certificate course the following July. After I had been there 8 weeks, I decided to enlist in the Navy and carried the decision into execution the 21st of November 1917. In company with 2 other recruits, I landed at the Norfolk, Virginia training station the 24th of November. I spent my first night in the bug house and had to sleep on the deck with at least 50 other recruits. Next day, we all new recruits got our clothing, a sea bag, a hammock, and a mattress. We had to drill 8 hours a day when the weather was favorable. When I had drilled 2 days, my feet went on the bum. The chief excused me from drill for 2 or 3 days until my feet got better. After I'd been on the station a week, I was detailed for the mess hall as a mess cook. A mess cook's duty is to put the food on the table and wash the dishes. Most every man in the Navy has to do a hitch as a mess cook. A hitch on the station is a week, and aboard a ship, it is 3 months. I have served both of them. While our company was at Norfolk, we had some of the coldest weather I have ever seen. One of those cold days, we had to go out on the field and stand attention for 45 minutes, and my feet froze. A week later, they gave me quite a bit of trouble. After we had been here a few days, we were given Springfield rifles, shell butts, and bayonets. We were taught to port arms, shoulder arms, slope arms, present arms, and order arms. It is a pretty scene to see several companies going through physical drill with arms. On the 8th of May, I and 8 of my company were drafted for the USS Susquehanna. She is one of the German ships taken over by the government. She is over 600 feet long, 85 feet wide, has 8 decks, a crew of 600, and could make 14½ knots. When she was loaded to her capacity, she carried 3,000 troops, 8,000 tons of cargo, and 3,500 tons of coal. We used most of this coal going over and back. 16 troop ships sailed from Newport News, Virginia for France on the 10th of May. When we were 4 days out, we struck a rough sea, and here is where I got seasick. This lasted 2 days. The rest of the trip was smooth. We landed at Brest, France, the 23rd of May. On the 29th of May, we sailed for the States in company with 3 other ships. The sub-destroyer came out with us 2 nights and 1 day. They turned back for France before daylight of the 2nd day out. At 9 o'clock that morning, we were attacked by a sub. She sank the USS President Lincoln. This was the biggest ship in the convoy. She was hit 3 times with torpedoes and went down in 32 minutes. She lost several men, but I never learned how many. The rest of us made our getaway and landed at Newport News on the 10th of June. In all, I made 5 trips to France. Each time we landed on Brest. On our second return, we were attacked by a sub. The destroyer's men were with us this time, and they sent the sub to the bottom. On our return trips, we brought wounded soldiers who were not able for further duty in the trenches. With this, I send a Merry Christmas and Happy New Year to the Gazette and all its readers. I am your friend, Will H. Hood.
I'm reading a letter from Sarah Babb, New Albany, Mississippi native. Born March 16, 1873, and this was written to the Greenville Weekly Democrat Times, July the 25th, 1918. My dear Miss Taylor, I am tremendously interested in everything that is happening to me. Every nurse is ordered to report on arrival to Holly Hotel, and then various units are sent out to hotels leased by the government. Our unit is fortunate in being sent here, as we are in the midst of things, and we can walk to almost every one of the various departments. Every hour of the day, we're kept busy reporting for various equipments, for passports, for vaccinations, drills, singing lessons,
and a tape. So there isn't much time for sightseeing. We have a drill master, Captain Russell, who says he gives us exactly the same drill the soldiers take. Our unit is a company divided into platoons and squads. We have a captain, Miss Gibbons, 3 lieutenants, Miss Surgeon of New Orleans, Miss Tarpey of El Paso, and myself. And then there are the sergeants and the corporals. I enjoy the drills very much and am always thinking how splendid it will be for my school children when I get back. Our singing master is a lieutenant and teaches us the songs of the soldiers and sailors. Each unit has a song, and we have chosen Dixie. And the Colorado unit sings the Battle Hymn of the Republic. Units come and go, and you're never noticed. The New Yorkers tell us that, but our unit has made New York sit up and take notice. Perhaps it's because we are so country and odd. We have had writings in all the leading papers. I think, too, it's because of the sisters being in charge. That has been unusual. Ours are the first American sisters to be sent over. We drill in the armory of the famous New York 71st. 4 units usually drill at once. We have several captains who drill us, and day by day we find a unit absent, and then they never come back again. They've been shipped away in the night or the dawn. The utmost secrecy is observed. How quickly events move, and how insignificant we all are, blown about like leaves on the winds of fate. Please write me. I want to hear from you before I am too remote. Yours affectionately,
And the less severely wounded
Sarah
and
Back.
sick are sent as soon as evacuation is made possible. In a field ambulance service, the work is principally seeing early evacuation of the sick and wounded to the casualty clearing station. As a medical officer of the Brigade of Artillery, my duties at first were mostly of an executive and sanitary nature for the greater part. There was no trouble to keep cool. In this position, I took the place of a British officer who had been killed only a few hours before and put my cot down in the dugout where he and his 2 helpers had been killed by a shell striking a tree, ricocheting into the dugout. One drizzly afternoon, I saw a German observation plane come over. Because of the clouds, he had to fly low, very low at times, not over 100 feet above the ground. His job was to locate our batteries. He flew over me and waved a defiant hand. If I'd have been a good shot, I could have plugged him with a revolver. He went back to his lines, and in less than half an hour, the German guns began to shell our batteries. As officer in charge of a first aid dressing station, my work for the greater part was first aid dressing and directing my 46 men how to bring in the wounded, and then after dressing, how to evacuate them to the rear. While in command of this station, I saw the bravest boy I'd ever seen. He was brought in with his right arm practically blown off at the shoulder. He had walked over a mile, had lost quite a bit of blood, and was practically exhausted. Though suffering great pain, he did not complain, but looked anxious. I went over to him, and upon asking him if he wanted something, he took his other hand, put it inside his tunic, brought out 2 telegrams, and said, "Sir, will you please see that these are delivered?" This boy was only 19 years old, and yet his sense of duty was so great that though only a dispatch rider, he could forget his own suffering to the extent of delivering his messages, so they could be carried over to their destination. I dressed this boy and shall always remember him as the grittiest fellow I ever knew. Somehow the artillery officers chose dressing stations for their gun emplacements. They must have some place to conceal the flares from the gun. But it does seem to me they should choose another place than immediately behind the dressing station, because such a position draws enemy fire. Within 50 feet of this big gun, there is a newly made grave with a crude cross made out of 2 sticks of wood, undressed and unpainted, but on this the most appropriate epitaph: some mother's son. Having had my school experience, I was transferred about a month ago to the casualty clearing station. And in this class of work, I'm to remain until transferred back to the Americans, among whom I'm supposed to be qualified by that time to do war surgery. Such a station is a mobile hospital near the front. Here we operate on all serious cases, keep them until they're able to be evacuated further back to a base hospital, where they will stay till well or die or evacuated to England. The work here is heavy. We have 5 operating teams working 5 days, 5 by day and 5 by night. Major operations will run between 80 and 140, between 40 and 180 in 24 hours, according to the activity on our immediate front. Our hospital trains are a marvel of construction and service for the wounded and sick soldiers. These trains have large steel coaches so arranged that they will care for 36 stretcher case spaces or 72 seating cases per coach. There are 16 coaches to train. Each train has an isolation ward for transmissible diseases, thus protecting other men from additional contagion, a dressing ward for slightly injured cases, an emergency operating room, a drugstore, a kitchen serving hot drinks to those able to take them. All of this run by competent doctors, efficient nurses, and capable orderlies. Though worn and tired after 3 years of an awful carnage and suffering, everybody today is still more determined than ever not to let up until Germany is completely beaten and, like Babylon, has fallen to rise no more.
Jesse J. Lee, Company I, 303rd Stevedore Regiment. Dear Sir and Madam, I feel it my duty to write you all and explain to you all my feelings towards your son who accompanied us on the voyage to France, being so very much impressed with his manly conduct and behavior towards me on the trip. And 2, I think that you will be glad to hear from him and that I met him. He accorded me the kindest treatment on board ship, which no more could be expected of him, being of the royal blood he is. I cannot and never will forget his kindness towards me. Now before you begin to wonder who I am, I will try to tell you. I am Jesse J. Lee, the ex-mail carrier of Greenville, also the recent laundry solicitor from Messrs. Leon, Fletcher, and Harris. I am with the forces in France to assist in winning the war, if such can be, and I am putting my whole heart in the work, as you know too well that I will do. I'm not exactly on the firing line, but I am back of those who are. I have received the highest honor that my company can award one for service. I hope this will find you and your family well and prosperous in your affairs. It leaves me well. I hope to be back home again someday and meet you all face to face and talk over the times now happening. I also hope your broad-hearted son will be home to make you and his mother glad in your old days. Sergeant Jesse J. Lee,
Written Samuel K. Jr. to his father from France. His dear father, I've had the most interesting trip today. We made an early patrol this morning, and as that was the only time we were scheduled to fly, 6 of us decided it was a good time to have a look at the front from the ground. I had no idea that war was quite so destructive. The little villages that we passed through were literally shot to pieces. The buildings over here are all made of stone, and in this case, where there was once a house, there is now only a pile of rocks and plaster. Big trees along the road were cut in two by a single shell, and trees in the wood were burnt to death by gas. The ground was simply a mass of shell holes. The Allies had been advancing so fast that they hadn't had time to bury all the dead. And lots of places, the ground, especially in the wood, was covered with dead Germans and horses. We could hear the whizzing sound coming, and then about 100 feet in the air, a white puff of smoke would appear with a bang. It was shrapnel that burst in the air and scattered before striking the earth. A German aviator came over and shot down one of our observation balloons. That made us feel like we weren't doing our job. In the morning, we fly over that same territory at a low altitude, and I hope he tries it again. I am your affectionate son, Sam. This letter was by Hugh Wiley, and it was written to his mother. Dear Mom, just received the roll of commercial appeals from you this morning, which are the first of all you've sent me. Words are faint to express the pleasure I had in reading them, even to all woman ads. My division got a citation from General Pershing and one of the French generals for the work they've done. My regiment, which is heavy artillery, had orders to hold at all costs, and the light guns and infantry had orders to advance. Guess you know the result. They were stopped and our boys advanced 1.5 miles the first day and have been going forward ever since. They were at a time. Thought then we were on our way to Paris for the July 4th celebration, 14th celebration. We called back to the Allies. We called back of the lines and stayed there until after the 14th. The report they got around that we were on our way to a rest area, as ours had been at the front for 6 months. Just about dark one night, bugles blew assembly, and all ran up and received orders to saddle up and attack, which is marching order. Started about 9 p.m., all thinking we were going to that long looked for rest. We marched all night without stopping and until 2 p.m. the next day without breakfast or dinner. At 2 p.m. we stopped, watered and fed the horses, and had some hot coffee. Lay down and slept for an hour. Fed and watered the horses again. By that time, the cooks had opened some monkey meat and hardtack. It was then time to saddle up again. Started as soon as it was dark enough to conceal us from block airplanes. My battery was not in the thick of it, but was where we could see everything that took place. It was a scene that is beyond me to describe, but one that can never be forgotten by those who witnessed it. We soon had them on the run, pushing them back as far that we could not reach them with the heavies, and had a hard time moving fast enough to catch up. It was open warfare for several days, and the ground over which we advanced for several days was covered thick with German dead. In the advance, 2 planes circled us and dropped 2 bombs on us and killed 6 of the boys in our battery, giving the rest a pretty good scare. For an aerial bomb is not like any of the others. You can't tell where it will hit. Suppose you have learned that the shells made a humming noise, and anyone who has been at the front long can tell which way they're going and about how fast. The only thing to do when we hear one coming is to lie with the body just as close to the ground as a fellow can get. And believe me, there's always strong competition to see who can lie the closest when the Bach begins to send over their two tens.
Before I read, I'm not going to miss an opportunity to promote this library. We're having a book sale September 29th, which is in conjunction with this Riverfest. And we encourage you to bring your books and to donate them. At first, Sandy and I didn't think that this was a big deal, a book sale. But we're finding out in Tupelo, the Tupelo Library with their book sale, they make $200 to $300 an hour for a full-day book sale. So it's getting to become a bigger and bigger deal. We're donating about 200 to 300 books. So that's at $1 a book, that's $200 to $300. So we encourage you, and that's one household. Just think what Russ ought to be bringing books in. Okay. Dear Bill, it has been some time since I have heard from you. I am now in a base hospital, slightly wounded and getting along fine. My only regret is that I must leave. That means that I lose my division and my platoon, the one I have been with for a year. It is rather hard and unjust in a way to learn every man's name and habits in a dot and work hard trying to teach him how to fight, then have to leave them. Of course, we realize it is for the benefit of our Army and am willing to give up anything for the cause, even our platoon.
The reason for it is when we are evacuated to a base, not knowing how long we will be there, would mean for the company to be short of officers who are needed. Everyone here is growling over the fact of losing his platoon. There are about 150 lieutenants here in this base and one major. The major, and the only thing he hated was losing his battalion. A second lieutenant said, "That's nothing. I'm going to lose my platoon." This is a lieutenant's war after the battle starts. He is the big guy. Communications are broken and it is up to them to carry on, and we do. And then skipping down, one would think seeing hundreds of men lying around dead in every condition possible that it would lower the morale of the men, but it only makes them more determined. There was a Negro soldier bringing in a Boche prisoner with the rank of major. He made the major carry his full field pack on his back and took the monocle out of the German's eye, placed it in his own, and started down to headquarters. Bill, the American private is the best soldier in the world. We should be proud to be one. Let me continue.
I would not. It's the same person. Charles has to go back.
Okay.
Just rate it.
Dear Mama, we don't have, I need to tell you who this is.
No,
No,
it's the same person.
it's the same person.
Well, he just went one ahead. I
Okay.
told him you had two letters
Okay.
by the same one, but we didn't get that right. That's okay.
Dear Mama, by the way, my mama was born in 1918. I just have, that's right after, I guess it ended in 1918. Okay. The war is over, and I have lived through it, but I never expected to. General Foch sent word to Paris today to remove all sandbags, turn on all lights. That big Bertha, the gun that fired on Paris, had run away with the Kaiser. The Place des Opera, and our family stayed right at this junction once when we were over in Paris. So I've got a visual image of this. The Place des Opera is a place where 5 streets converge and in peacetime has more traffic than any other place in the world. At one end of it, the Opera House, the steps of which will hold about 1,000 people. All of this place was packed and the whole crowd sang the Marseillaise, their national anthem. The police stood on the corners in bunches of 10 and 12 and laughed as they tore up what they wanted to. They dared not interfere. After 5 years of this horrible war and their capital threatened twice, 2,500,000 French killed, not casualties, but killed, don't you think they have a right to celebrate? Mama, it makes me feel so bad when I think of these good old Americans that we must leave in France. But they haven't died for nothing, thank God. And I got my share of the Boche, that's, I guess, the Germans. And avenge the death of some of my dear friends that I have seen go down in the battle like true American heroes. We all have done some things to the Boche that might seem dishonorable to the average citizen, but the Boche deserves all of what we gave him. Maybe you think your son isn't glad that it is all over, but I am tickled to death to think I don't have to sleep in a cracker box under the ground and wade in muddy trenches up to my knees this winter. Just makes me happy as if I had good sense.
Here in New Albany after the war. Writing to his friends, he says, "My dear friends, if you will get your war map down and locate the village of Censored, which is on the west bank of the Marne River, you will find where I spent Sunday night on the 14th of July, when the great drive started. And we are still driving. If you'd been there Monday morning on the 15th, you could have seen the Germans being marched to the rear of our lines by companies. But I'm glad for the sake of your life you were not. The shells were bursting thick all around us. But all day long we took prisoners. Just as sunset Monday evening, we had a big battle. I shot Germans until my rifle barrel was so hot I couldn't bear my hand on it. Then came the order to fix bayonets, prepare to rush. I reached to the scabbard for my bayonet and it was gone. It had fallen out of the scabbard while I was crawling through the woods, so you see, I was out of luck. But soon came the order that there was no rush. I felt much better. Then dark came on and I was sent to no man's land, as we called it, to spend the night. It was raining and the grass and bushes were wet. I could crawl without making any noise at all, so I crawled within 15 steps of enemy lines and lay there until just before dawn the next morning. I could hear the Germans whispering to each other all through the night. And every few minutes they sent a stream of bullets just above my head. It was luck for me they were higher than I, but they shot over me all the while. Just before day they retreated, and I went back to our lines. Your friend, Dalton C. Robinson. Now, Leo Holloway, writing from France to his wife in October 1918. I suppose you will have decided by this time that the Boche has got me. If you could see how much ground I have covered in this past 30 days, you would think I was very much alive. And I can say that the Hun is a very good mover, as he's always hard to catch. Since I've been at the front, I've scarcely had a chance to write. I'm about to become accustomed to the whizzing of shells, but must admit that the tune is quite lonesome. Nothing you have seen, heard, or read can express the desolation the Hun has left in his path. What once were thriving villages are now but masses of ruins, all grown up in weeds and grass, and have the semblance of ruins of some ancient and extinct race of people. No one but an eyewitness can realize the somber appearance of no man's land as it appears, a mass of wire entanglements, all plowed and furrowed by months of constant shell fire. But thank God the vandal is retracing his steps, and let us hope the Allied armies will soon be on the banks of the Rhine, and the Kaiser will soon see from his palace at Potsdam the glow of the American campfires. I've experienced some pretty severe hardships, but if they think they can hurt me with rain, mud, and cold, or sleeping on the ground, they have another guest coming. Our regiment has been in action almost constantly and seen some real hard service. We were in the drive in the Saint-Mihiel sector and were in the fighting in the Argonne forest. The Argonne, we met with considerable resistance, but we gave them H. H. I was giving the German pronunciation. We gave them H, if you will allow the expression, for no other word in the English language can describe the heavy artillery barrage. I've never seen anything that looked better to me than the long columns of German prisoners marching to the rear, led by American MPs. But I'm not so callous as to say that I enjoyed seeing them dead, as they are at least human. But each American boy I see dead, murdered by these Huns 3,000 miles from home, makes me feel as though I should like to pull the string that would send them all to eternity. I don't wish to be any prophet, but mark my word down. The Germans can't stand the pace these American boys have set. They're soon going to holler, "No," loud and long. Little girl I'm longing to sod eyes with her again, and now can almost taste the glad welcome that awaits me back in that dear old country. Let us hope that it won't be long. Don't get jealous. I have not seen more than a fleeting glance of a skirt in 6 weeks. We had lots of love. I am as ever, Leo.
Henry Spinner Kitchens was from New Albany. It says, and he was described as both a streetcar motorman and also a farmer. I'm not sure where he applies the former trade. Did New Albany ever had any streetcars? I don't think so. But he ended up in Graves registration. And this first letter was sent to his family, apparently shortly before the end of the hostilities on September 28, 1918. Dear Mama and all, I've landed safely in France after a long voyage. I sure did get tired of the water before I got here. We didn't have much trouble coming over. I like France fine, all except the water supply is short, and I can't get a bath, and what we do get is bad tasting. I guess I'll have to act like a camel. The wine supply is plentiful over here, they say. I'll be glad when I can go to town. I guess it will be a long time, for we were under quarantine for 18 days on account of mumps. Some of the boys caught them on the ship. It seems that I'm doomed to quarantine, but I've been under quarantine ever since I've been in the Army. We went out on the cemetery today to bury 12 soldiers, and we have to bury 18 tomorrow. The U.S. cemetery is so pretty. Mama, you ought to see the pretty flowers they put on the grave. They're made of beads and celluloid. Well, I've seen a lot of German prisoners. They look mean. The Americans sure do treat prisoners nice. It's no wonder the Germans want to give up to them. They feed them as much as they do to us. The Saudis are doing some good fighting these days. I guess you've noticed that in the papers. There are lots of American soldiers wounded here getting ready to go home. They all have a big tale to tell, but we can't write anything of what we see or hear. The women here are all doing men's work. I'll write you again soon, your son, Sergeant H.F. Kitchens. The second letter was sent, about 9 months later, in response to, I guess, what we call Memorial Day today. It was on May 30th, 1919. Dear Mama and all, I guess you'd like to know what we did here on Decoration Day. First, we fixed the cemeteries up nice, and we decorated them with flags. I have some Kodak pictures of the performance. The French, and he has in parentheses Carolines with a question mark, led the parade after the band, which was about 50 strong. Then the little girls with flowers came. I suppose there must have been about 1,000. Then the French cavalry, all mounted on white horses with flags flying. The American Red Cross nurses came next, dressed in blue with black hats. Then the firing squad, the ones that shoot over the dead soldiers. I believe the troops came next. I would judge about 20,000. I never saw so many soldiers together in my life. They were lined up outside the cemetery. My little bunch was lined up inside to wait on the Red Cross nurses, carry flowers for them, 2 truckloads of them that the Red Cross brought, not counting what they brought in their hands and what the French brought. The band played several nice pieces, the Star Spangled Banner, etc., and we also had some nice speeches by some American officers. Your son, Sergeant H. Fenner.
This letter is in regard to Emma Eugene Wenzel, born in Natchez, Mississippi, 1884. My dear Mr. Wenzel, I do not know whether you have yet heard the very sad news of your sister, Mrs. Emma E. Venn, succumbed to pneumonia in France. I am sorry to say that she died on Saturday morning, October the 26th, while at the hospital in the line of duty as an American Red Cross searcher. As you probably know, influenza followed, as it is here so often, but pneumonia has been playing havoc among our troops in France. Your sister evidently got the disease in trying to carry out her noble humanitarian work of helping to take care of the soldiers who were ill. She herself received the best possible medical attention, and everything was done for her both to save her life and to prevent her from suffering. I hope you will always feel sad. I hope you will always feel sad as you must inevitably be for your personal loss, that she died as truly as any soldier in the pursuance of her noble duty. We shall receive further details by mail and shall of course send you any word that may come to us. You have the very sincere sympathy of the American Red Cross, which has lost a faithful worker. Sincerely yours, W.R. Castle, Jr., Director.
My mother-in-law, Ducky, was born September 12, 1918. She makes it to the 12th of this year, she'll be 100 years old. She can't tell you what happened last week, but now she can tell you all about the 20s and 30s. Van Andrew Cabot Sr. at sea to his father, November 23rd, 1918, and obviously this letter was published in the Cram Ledger in Jackson, December 22nd, 1918. Dearest Daddy, at last there is no more censorship on our mail, for as you know, there is no more German high sea fleet. That at least is one thing that will go down in history, and I can very proudly say that I was certainly right there. I expect that you have read various accounts of it, come back to the surrender, but I will try to give it to you just as anyone would see it from the inside. Last Saturday is one of the worst fogs ever seen. The German admiral came into the Firth of Forth on Royal Oak and immediately went aboard the Queen Elizabeth, the flagship of the Grand Fleet. What happened aboard is not known. But it was arranged that 15 A-1 ships would surrender on the 21st day of November. In the morning of the 21st, all hands were called at 3 a.m. as we were to go out about 100 miles to meet and escort them into the Firth of Forth, where they were to anchor and lower their colors. At 9:10, we first met them, and all hands were battle stationed with ammunition up and in the guns. So if there were to be any treachery on the part of the Hun, we would be prepared. But they showed no signs of any hostility, and as soon as secure, all men were on the top deck with Kodaks. That's cameras for you young people. It was certainly one of the most humiliating scenes I ever saw. But when you think of what they had done, you have no pity for them. They anchored just about a mile from where we were, and the men and his officers were sent back to Germany on a transport that same day. It has now been 1 year, less 2 days, since we steamed out of Lynn Haven Road for foreign service. So you see, I am entitled to wear 2 gold service stripes. That is one more than the soldiers out of our family will have. If you will get a large map of the British Isles, you will see in the most northern part, Orkney Isles, where there is a place where we were all last winter. It is without doubt the most dismal place in the world. Nothing to see but small mountains covered with snow, and it gets so rough that at times they would have to get up steam to keep from going into the rocks. No liberty of any kind, as there is but one place there. So you see, I have seen the British Isles from the most northern part to the most southern part. All last winter, our job was to convoy the merchant ships from here to Norway and Sweden, and to go out with the mine layer so that if the Germans did come out, we would be there. Let me tell you something. Some think that the men in the Navy get away with it, but they do not. For a while we were out, we stood watch 20 hours on and 4 hours off, as many as 3 days at a time, and no more than we would get in port, and we would have to take on about 12,000 tons of coal. We burn 360 tons a day at full steam, so you readily see that it is no picnic. And I, for one, am certainly glad it is over with. The USS Florida leaves today for the States, and I guess that we are next in line. Anyway, they have the plans for a $10,000 ball at the Astor Hotel as soon as we arrive in Brooklyn. I expect that I'll have better clothes. I expect to see you soon, and I will be able to tell you more than what I can write. Love to all. Van. Van ended up coming back, and I became a teacher at Sledge and superintendent of schools in Calhoun County.
Dear Mrs. Kitchens, I am just in receipt of your letter relative to the death of Lieutenant L.W. Kitchens and will answer same at once. I had written you about 2 months ago about the death of my true friend, Lieutenant Kitchens, but surmise you had not yet received it at the time you wrote me. The mail service has been slow and irregular, that so much of our mail has been lost. I will enclose a postal from Captain Jackson. It shows the chateau which the British had converted into a hospital. Just back of the chateau is the little cemetery in which they laid the body of Lieutenant Kitchens. Much regret was expressed by the officers of number 131 when we learned of Lieutenant Kitchens' death. He was a favorite with each of us. I had much reason to cherish his friendship and helping hand. Because of my asthma, he would take my clothes, roll together with his own, and give me a chance to keep up with the rest. So much were we together that they called us the 131 twins. I will always remember the modest, unassuming officer from Mississippi, and will ever regard his true friendship as one of the bright spots in life's journey. The sympathy of our unit was with you and the little babes in the hour of your grief and loss. I received your letter at mess this noon, and many expressions of kind feeling toward you and the memory of Lieutenant Kitchens. With best wishes, I beg to remain your sincere friend, Robert C. Mollison, Captain. Mr. B.A. Lincoln of this city, Columbus, is in receipt of the following letter from his brother, Lieutenant Lonnie W. Lincoln, who was a member of the Tank Corps in France. I had no trouble in locating Atwell's grave and found it in excellent condition. The little cemetery contains about 40 American soldiers and is laid out in 3 rows and each numbered. Also, on a leaf plate on the head cross is the name, rank, and organization of each, also date of death. As you no doubt know, they are at present moving all bodies into 3 or 4 large cemeteries, and the men killed in the St. Maio fighting are being put in the St. Maio Cemetery, which is on the hill in sight of Ames. This one will contain 4,000 graves. It is in the form of a square, and in the center will be a flagpole with the American flag. The officers are being grouped around the center, and all graves will be marked the same way. a large white cross at the head and standing about 4 feet high with the name, rank, organization, and date of death plainly in black. It is right in the heart of all that fighting, and it is fitting that these brave fellows should rest so near the place where they gave their lives. The cemetery will be kept up by the national cemeteries in the states and consequently will receive the best of care and attention.
All right, it's time to go, and I will be brief. Usually when a lawyer in court says he's going to be brief, 30 minutes later, he's still talking. And, but in the epilogue, let me just mention 4 million men served in World War I in the Great War, and over 100,000 died. 704 of those were from Mississippi. The American Expeditionary Force was the first regular modern U.S. Army, and everything we have now evolved from that army. Most of the generals in World War II cut their teeth in World War I as to military experience. Europe was totally devastated by World War I. On the other hand, the United States experienced a revival in our economy. The economy had really been so. One of the things about World War I was that after the war, this set the stage for Hitler and the Nazi Party, and it also set the stage for Russia and the Bolshevik rebellion, and for Stalin and Karl Marx to take over in Russia and communism. So it really was not that long after World War I that World War II started, and probably they all just kind of meshed together if you follow the history of the transition from World War I through World War II. I'll just mention one other thing real quick. I had an opportunity to go see all these World War I battlefields several years ago with a group. They're at Verdun, which was one of the biggest battles. If you get a chance, Google the term bayonet trench. There is a trench about as far as maybe the width of this room. There's not a trench. There's just an area that's been marked off, and there's that much of the tip of bayonet sticking up. All the Allied soldiers were sitting in that trench with their rifles at ready for the guy to blow the whistle, and they were going to jump, go out of the trench and charge. And a shell hit the side of the trench and buried all those men at one time. And all of their bayonets are sticking up out of the soil about that far, and you can just see where they were all sitting there. You might want to look that up sometime. Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you for your attention. I hope this has brought to light to you what some of our American ancestors suffered for freedom. Not only freedom in Europe at that time, but our freedom as well. If you can see, some of you can see these are letters that the library has 2 copies. We only hit the high notes of the letters in here. That some of them are, as you heard, were funny. It was just those men being men, young boys. And of course, when Bill spoke of World War II, that was young men, young boys. Announcements. Linda, you want to tell about tickets for Duck Regatta?
Yes, the Duck Regatta will be the Saturday, the same day as this book sale, so you can walk over and come back and shop for books again. The tickets are on sale. You can get them from Rotary members or at the museum.
And next month, the 18th, we will have Kate Stewart, and she will review Soldier's Pay, which kind of takes this theme on a little bit, and this is also will be in conjunction with the literary luncheon. Thank you so much. If you can see here, thank these men and women for reading these letters today. I appreciate them so much and for what they did for us today, and I hope you enjoy it.